Okay, welcome to our third session of the conference organized by the Institute of the Biblical Study at the John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin. The title of the conference is Between Text and Reader, Exploring Strategies and Practices of Ancient and Contemporary Bible Translation. The third hour session, today's session, will be dedicated to especially wisdom books, and the session is going to be presided by Professor Marcin Zieliński from our Institute of Biblical Study here in Lublin. I welcome him heartily and invite him to just guide this session. Father Marcin, he's also a specialist in wisdom literature, so he's the most competent to lead this session. So, Professor Marcin, the floor is yours. Organize and guide this session. Please go on.
Thank you very much. I would like to welcome everyone once again to our next session. So that's the third session of our conference. As Father Henrik told you, my name is Marcin Zieliński. You can call me Marcin. I will have this honor of chairing this third session. I would like to remind you only that it will last 90 minutes. So we work together until 4:30 p.m. We have 3 presentations prepared by our Polish biblical scholars on the agenda. And each presentation will last about 20 minutes. And it will be followed by time for comments and questions. So at this point, I don't want to steal your time, your precious time, so I think we can begin. We can start. Our first speaker, Father Jakub Bluj, is a lecturer of Old Testament exegesis and biblical Hebrew. He's also the director of the College of Philosophy and Theology of the Polish province of the Order of Preachers, Krakow, Poland. And the title of his presentation is Metamorphosis of the Ancient Text, Different Language Forms of Sira 37:7 to 15 as a test case. So, Father Jakub, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me share with you my presentation. Good afternoon. I would like to thank the organizers of the conference, especially Professor Travner and Dr. Bąk, for the opportunity, but also all the staff, for the opportunity to participate in the meeting and share with you results of my research. The chapter 4 of Book of Tobit contains a series of advices from Tobit to his son, Tobias. One of those reiterates a trope from the wisdom literature, as we see it, for example, in Book of Proverbs. Seek advice from every prudent person and do not despise any useful counsel. As beautiful as it sounds, it seems to be unpractical. What kind of advice should be heeded? How does one distinguish between useful and useless counsel? Of course, the same wisdom literature tries to deal with that, as we have, for example, in the Book of Proverbs, a simple person believes everything, but a clever man ponders his course. We have also a similar tradition in the book of Ben Sira. Let us, in chapter 37, we find a whole pericope which focuses on the heeding to an advice. Let us start with a concise presentation of the pericope. The first 3 verses, 7 to 9, serve as a general introduction to the topic. The general idea is that every counselor advises having himself or herself in mind, extolling at the same time his or her objectivity. In the worst-case scenario, such an advisor purposely gives a bad advice only to look from afar one's misfortune. That's the end of verse 9. The second, the longest part of the passage, The next two verses, 10 and 11, concerns people that should not be consulted. In verse 11, the list seems to follow the rationale already expressed in verse 8. No one is without bias. Therefore, specific people cannot give objective advice in specific matters. In verse 10, however, the warning is absolute. It is not limited to specific cases. The list of the characters of the human types that is contained in these verses shows a certain variety in the textual witnesses of the book, and the analysis of those differences will be main focus of the paper. Don't worry, not all of the differences will be analyzed. We don't have time for that. And the last part of the pericope offers a solution. Indeed, it offers 3 solutions in a row. Benjamin Wright even speaks about crescendo, the going importance of the answers given. First, in verse 12, it is hardly surprising, but the pericope or the sage recommends the reader to choose as an advisor a pious person, one that shares the reader's convictions, keeps commandments, or in Syriac, does not sin, but it says the same thing, and will help the reader in need. The next two verses, 13 and 14, somewhat surprisingly, the sage advises the reader to listen to his or her heart's advice, as it warns much better than sentries on guard, duty. Finally, in the last verse, verse 15, the reader is advised to pray to God as he establishes one's ways in truth. Between the lines, it is not said explicitly, but between the lines we may infer that prayer is means to receive God's advice, perhaps the only advice that is not tainted by the advisor bias. As I said, I would like to present you some cases where the preserved language versions differ from each other. The passage is attested in 2 Hebrew witnesses, in manuscript B and manuscript D, both medieval manuscripts from Cairo, Geniza. The first, manuscript B, also has a marginal readings. I will use the 2 translations, also 2 translations from Hebrew, Syriac, in Peshitta, in manuscript from Ambrosian Library, and Greek, according to Ziegler's critical edition. And in one case, we look also at the Vetus Latina as well. Obviously, one cannot simply assume that one of the Hebrew witnesses is simply the original text. However, manuscript D seems to me to be close to a textual form that gave rise to all the readings attested in other witnesses. The first case concerns the very first person type in verse 10a. We have different versions. The one manuscript, unfortunately, is unreadable. Probably we can tell because we have lacuna there. We have the destroyed manuscript, but probably it had a marginal reading because all we can see that there are some small circles above the word that should be there, or the words that should be there. In Greek version, we read that do not seek advice from someone who looks at you with suspicion. In manuscript D, we have do not allow yourself to be advised by your father-in-law. In Syriac, we have do not consult your enemy. The reading of manuscript D is the most surprising one. On one hand, it may be inferred from the biblical story of Jacob that not all advices given by a father-in-law are correct. On the other hand, Moses, another biblical hero, followed Jethro's advice, his father-in-law, with success. Let's note a peculiar choice of words. Hebrew uses the word ham that is used only 4 times, always with a possessive suffix, in 2 stories in Genesis 38 and 1 Samuel 4, 1 Samuel 4. What seems to be difficult is that in the Hebrew Bible, it always refers to a father-in-law of a woman. But in the pericope of Sirach 37, one may presume the addressee is male, as all the verbal forms and suffixes are masculine singular. However, in other Northwest Semitic languages, cognate words are used to refer also to a man's father-in-law, as is also the case in post-biblical and rabbinical Hebrew. A different explanation can be found that not a father-in-law should be consulted. Indeed, it can be a long word from Aramaic. There is a third weak verb, ama, that is well known and means to see or to observe. And from the form that we have in Hebrew text of Syriac is therefore a participle with an objective suffix. The solution has the advantage that explains the version preserved in Greek, someone who looks at you with suspicion, and two variants of Vetus Latina as well. Those two variants depend on the Greek text, cum eoci tibi insidiatur, or cum eoci suspectum te habet. Moreover, the interpretation finds another confirmation in the fact that in the next stich, 10b, contains a synonymous formulation, one that is jealous of you, meccane. In the Vetus Latina, we have yet another problem or surprise. First of all, we have another variant that is also present, noli conciliare cum socero tuo. First thing is it does not appear in the same place as in Hebrew or Greek text, but before verses 6 and 7, which indeed is nonsensical. But secondly, this reading agrees with the first interpretation of the Hebrew text. It is the father-in-law. To complicate the situation even more, there is not even one witness of Greek that could explain this translation. Yet, Rudolf Sment, one of the great scholars of Hebrew Ben Sira, and Ben Sira in general, in his commentary, marks this reading as the reading from extended Greek text that we heard, at least it was mentioned in the morning session. In my opinion, it is much more probable that a peculiar Latin reading is a partial revision of the text, of the Latin text, to bring the reading closer to the apparent Hebrew meaning. The mistaken placement of that verse can be explained as a marginal note incorporated into the text, as it happens sometimes. It was placed in a wrong space, perhaps because it was free as kind of a lacuna that is making a difference between two different pericopes. Finally, the Syriac text does not use the noun father-in-law nor the verb to see, but employs a very general term, senech, your enemy. It is impossible, in my opinion, to decide whether that general term the use of this general term was caused by trouble of seeing father-in-law as an unsuitable advisor, or just making explicit the nature of one looking with spite. Moreover, in the Syriac rendering of the verse, also second stick contribute to the translation. The Syriac senech is a result of a merging chamicha with the mekkane in the next stich, as in Syriac verse 10b, does not name the person in question, simply using preposition mem with third masculine singular pronominal enclitic. That was the first case. The second and the third case will be much shorter, I hope. In verse 11b, Ben Sira recommends not to seek an advice about war or battle. The problem is, who should not be asked for the version mention different persons. Greek mentions a coward, Delios, which finds a close parallel in the exemptions from the battle in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 8b. Perhaps manuscript B goes along similar lines in reading that one should not be asked, is a dweller somebody who dwells? Dar, implying his lack of courage. Alternatively, if indeed Deuteronomy 24-8 has really influenced the passage, then the dweller should be understood as someone who not yet tasted fruit of his marriage, planted wine, or dedicated the house, and therefore is exempt from military service. In both cases, the stich suggests that the self-interest of the person is to avoid war or battle. Therefore, it is inappropriate person to ask for advice. In manuscript D and in marginal reading of B, however, a different person should not be asked because they both talk about conqueror, Lockheed, someone who takes captives. In this version, the optic is completely opposite. The conqueror is precisely a person who wants to go to war because of spoils of war. It seems to me that these two versions cannot be reconciled with as two techniques of translation, and they belong to two different textual versions. Even though Syriac does not translate faithfully any of the versions, its reading, with an enemy do not debate, seems to interpret Lochet as an adversary, overlooking any militaristic overtones, not even mentioning battle wall that is present in other variants. Third case is the first stich of the same verse, 11a, where the Syriac translation and transformation goes even further. Greek and both Hebrew manuscripts agree on the reading with a woman or wife, do not consult her with regard to her rival wife. Although Hebrew uses a unique word, tzara, attested only in the 1 Samuel 1:6, Greek has no problem in to render it idiomatically, antizelos, also a rare word in the Septuagint used only in Leviticus 18:18 and twice in Sirach once in our verse. The Sirach translator, however, made something totally unexpected. He, and I assume it's he, completely forgot about the topic of the pericope. Let us remind whom should not be consulted, and gives a warning. With a woman, do not commit adultery. This warning has nothing to do with the topic of the pericope. Perhaps I'm trying to save something unsavable, but the reading may be due to a lack of understanding of the source text. The translation understood the word tzara as distress, anxiety, enemy, and so on, and inferred that the warning concerns not going into the situation that could be morally dangerous to those heeding to the advice. The final case is in two stichs in 11G and H. Let us look at the verse in manuscript D, which is partly confirmed by reading in the margins of B. The text reads, do not consult a hired worker, po'el sahir, about work. Do not consult one-year workers, sahir shana, about produce of seas, motza, zera, with some difference in the manuscript, in marginal reading of B. The message conveyed is quite clear. Someone who is paid to work for 1 year should not be consulted about something that exceeds that period of time. Having that in mind, let us look at the version, probably secondary, at least in part, kept in mind by manuscript B. Do not consult a sluggard about his work. Do not consult with somebody who keeps nothing about one who brings out evil. In verse 11G, the version preserved in manuscript B, no longer qualified worker has a hired, but he is worthless as someone who does nothing, idle worker, or let us not forget about this possibility, someone who does deceit. I think that po'el shaveh is a more original reading. It makes sense to talk with a seasoned worker about his work, but to do so with somebody who does nothing, it should be a loss of time. Interestingly enough, the reading of manuscript of marginal reading of B confirms the version of manuscript B, not that of D, which is unusual. Also, Greek Okneros agrees with manuscript B, strongly suggested its originality. The reading of 11G in manuscript D is an attempt to harmonize two sticks with a similar motive, namely that of a hired worker. A series of really interesting changes is visible in the following stick, that is 11H. Firstly, the new word, the noun motza, produce, was interpreted as a call participle of matzah, to find, but the meaning finder, the one who finds, was not suitable. Therefore, a mere addition of yod, one yod, the smallest letter, it has changed into hifil participle of a different verb. The action results in a translation, someone who brings something forth. Secondly, the object of the participle was also altered. Instead of zera, seed, suitable in previous agricultural contexts, the scribe of manuscript B modified into ra, evil. I find it possible that these two changes were inspired by the phrase from Deuteronomy 22:14-19, Chotzi Shem Ra, later employed also in the rabbinic literature as a participle, namely Motzi Shem Ra, slanderer. The passage from Deuteronomy speaks about an accusation of a newly led woman by her husband that she was not a virgin when he took her for wife. Although not all rabbinic references are explicit about the circumstances of the defamation, one supposes that they deal with this problem. For example, in Mishnah Sanhedrin 1:1 deals with how many judges should decide the case of Motzi Shem Ra. Other examples from the Mishnah are similar. Yet the meaning seems to be different in Sira than it is in Deuteronomy and the rabbinic sources. First of all, Sira does not use the word Shem, name, nor the specific meaning to defame in anyhow implied in the context. Secondly, Deuteronomy in the rabbinic literature is closely connected with a specific law. The object of defamation is mentioned. Perhaps, it may be that the scribe only hinted to the whole institution, and it should be clear for the readers from the context, but he did not put it in his changed text because of the lack of space. The third change appears in the very beginning of the sticks, which no longer concerns a seasoned worker, Sahir Shana. In manuscript B, he is called Shomer Shaveh, somebody who keeps, observe nothing, nihilist, if you want. Probably under the influence of the one Shaveh used in 11G, original in my opinion. The change depicts a person who is an antonym of the one who should be advisor, that is the keeper of commandment, Shomer Mitzvah, in verse 12. Let us go back for a moment to 11G. At the beginning, I proposed three different translations of the phrase Poel Shaveh. Due to influence of the reading in manuscript B, it was translated as an idle or worthless worker, but now, having in mind the changed version of 11H, nothing impedance to understand it as in the first sense, namely doer of the seed. Original reading verse 11G, no one should consult an idle worker about his work, for he will try to propose a solution that does not require too much of his effort. The moral, ethical interpretation in manuscript B has a much more sinister undertone. Do not ask a deceiver about his work, or he will, deceive you. In a similar way, the keeper of nothing, when asked about someone who brings evil, perhaps himself, will use that opportunity to profit from it. Perhaps the scribe was inspired by Proverbs 18:9, someone who is lazy, mitrape, is in his work, is a brother to destroyer, literally to the Lord of destruction, Baal, mashhit. Probably the priority in 11H goes to manuscript D. Yet it is extremely interesting to see how the scribe used the opportunity to give a more moral or ethical meaning to the agricultural saying. It is even more fascinating, at least for me, to see that this was that he achieved it only by a couple strokes of his stylus. In conclusions, translation is often an onerous task, even more so if the source text uses words that are uncommon. In the case of different language versions of Ben Sirach, one has to consider also the fluidity of the textual traditional situation of the book. Sometimes we are only left guessing how a certain idiosyncratic reading came to be, by misunderstanding, by want or need to actualize and adopt the text to change circumstances. We cannot be sure, at least not always. Surely, we cannot stop wondering and researching, or, as they used to speak in medieval times, mane ad quaesti. Thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward for your questions and remarks.
Thank you very much for this very interesting and detailed presentation. So we see that it's not only difficult to translate, but to establish the critical version, the original version. So a lot of problems. Thank you very much. Now we have some time to share our impressions or even make our questions. So if somebody would like to say something, please raise the hand and ask. We have one, Shlomi. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Jakub, for these two defaults with the various versions of Ben Sirach. I will limit myself to one question on the first example, on Chamicha. I didn't fully understand whether or not you approve of the, or you accept the etymology from the Aramaic root Chami, to see, and how that, let's say, relates to the fact that this verb, as far as I'm aware, is only attested in the Western Aramaic dialects of, let's say, late antiquity, in Jewish Palestinian Aramaic and Christian Palestinian Aramaic. But as far as I'm aware, not in literary Aramaic known from the time of Ben Sira. And how do you react?
Yes, thank you for the question. Of course, I would say that it is possible to see it as an influence of Aramaic, especially in the that we see some influences of the Aramaic in different other parts of Sirach, but that's not the problem. The problem is that the dialect, geography does not allow us to see
Phonology
that.
rather than
Of course,
geography.
But then the question arises: how did? Well, that's how I arrived to that. It's like, how do you explain the Greek translation, which is quite early and quite consistent? It has not. Well, there are some differences. There are some variants, but they're all with the composed verbs that has blepo in them. So they're all connected with looking for somebody, and. Why somebody should not ask his father-in-law for I cannot, it's like it may be that we should look at it from the completely different point of view, because it is so strange. It was in Greek, it was changed into something more obvious. No, do not ask somebody who wishes you worse things. Yeah.
If I can make a
of course.
So I think that the etymology from Ham or Hami makes good sense when explaining the Greek.
Mhm.
As for the verb itself, I still debate. Because you're right, why shouldn't one consult with his father-in-law? But then again, we do find statements, at least in rabbinic literature, I'm not sure if earlier than that, about the how would I say, eternal hatred between a woman and her mother-in-law. So this sensibility to family relations has its, how to say, cultural background or cultural justification. It's not, so it can be made sense. The last comment is whether Ham as a father-in-law is a rather common word. So use it to use it in such as a idiosyncratic way to mean someone who looks at you is very likely to create misunderstanding or confusion. So yeah, so
also to give you the, you know, the I think more of the scholars will be in your corner. For example, in the recent critical edition of the Hebrew manuscripts with, you know, double translation into English, they translated as a father-in-law.
Raymond edition.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. They translated as a father-in-law. But then it would require, or the etymology is just a pure coincidence that the Greek has chosen that word. That would be also but as you said, that the biggest problem is that linguistically speaking, it does not work seamlessly. So yeah,
it's difficult.
Yeah, it is
But
difficult.
I would say that for Aramaic dialectology, the evidence of the Greek is important in and of itself. Even if it's not the original meaning, still it's a very early attestation of seems to be a very early attestation of the verb chami in this meaning.
Okay.
I don't think we can explain that, but thank you for your remarks. So it's more than question.
Yeah, but this discussion has to be continued. It's interesting. Okay. So we don't have a lot of time. Maybe we will come back to this subject at the end of our session. Now I'd like to introduce our second speaker, which is, I hope, with us, Marcin Majewski. He's a lecturer at the...
Thank you.
Yeah, hello, Marcin.
Hello.
Marcin is a lecturer at the Pontifical University of John Paul II in Krakow, Poland. He teaches mainly on Testament, the Biblical Hebrew. He directs also several research projects, including also those in dealing with the translation of ancient cuneiform texts. He's also very popular and successful YouTuber, so that's also interesting. He tries to make this biblical text and biblical knowledge, how to say, more accessible to everyone. And his presentation is about the ancient translations of the book of Ecclesiastes. So the floor is yours. We have roughly 20 minutes.
Thank you, Marcin, for the presentation. Thank you very much to the organizer for the opportunity to participate and to give a lecture. Okay, introduction. In this lecture, I will take a closer look at the ancient translations of the Book of Qoheleth, a book whose textual history is far richer than its short size might suggest. Ecclesiastes traveled through Greek, Syriac, Latin, Ethiopian, Coptic, and Aramaic traditions. At each stage, the book was reshaped and reinterpreted. These translations are not only windows into early exegesis, they are part of the transmission of the biblical text. My focus will be twofold. First, I will examine the major ancient witnesses, the Septuagint, the Jewish Greek revisions by Aquila, Symmachus, Theodotion, the Syriac Peshitta, Vetus Latina, and Jerome's Vulgate, as well as lesser-known Ethiopian, Coptic, and Aramaic Targumic versions. Second, I will ask what this translation reveal about the history of the text itself, how stable the Hebrew forlage was, when and where textual variations appeared, and how later translators positioned themselves in relation to the earlier ones. By comparing these different traditions, we can also observe the directions of influence between translation. For example, how the LXX Septuagint relate to the later Greek revisors, or how the Vetus Latina stands in contrast to Jerome's version. The ancient version of Kohelet shows that the history of the biblical text is a dynamic process of transmission across language communities, theological settings, and interpretative strategies. They remind us that the Bible, almost from the beginning, existed in more than one linguistic form, and that its meaning was carried through translation long before it was stabilized in a single written canon. After all, ancient translations of the Hebrew text are often older than the version of the Masoretic text we have today. Point 1. Greek translation of Septuagint. The book of Ecclesiastes was originally written in Hebrew, like most books of the First Testament, but in the Hellenistic period, many biblical books were translated into Greek. This translation were created for Jews living in the Greek-speaking world and for non-Jews who could read Greek but not Hebrew. The first and most important Greek translation is, of course, Septuagint. It is a collection of Jewish scriptures in Greek started in the 3rd century BC. Ecclesiastes was added to this collection very late, probably at the very end of the process, maybe even in the 1st or even the 2nd century AD. For this reason, its Greek differs from the rest of the Septuagint. The Greek translation of Ecclesiastes is extremely literal. The translator tried to match every Hebrew word with a Greek word, sometimes even keeping the same word order as in Hebrew. In many places, the syntax of the Hebrew original is simply copied into Greek, which makes the style heavy and unnatural for the Greek reader. For example, the Hebrew object marker et is translated mechanically as Greek sin, even though it makes little sense in Greek. Yeah? This kind of translation called formal equivalence or word-for-word translation. Because of the style, some scholars once thought that the translator of Ecclesiastes might actually have been Aquila from Sinop, the famous hyperliteral revisor of the Greek Bible. But now the definition differs. I have to I have to skip some part of my presentation of my lecture. Scholars debate why the translator chose such a rigid, inflexible technique. The most common explanation is that the translator reflects a Jewish context in which Hebrew was regaining prestige as sacred language, and translator wanted to stay as close as possible to the original wording. Another reason might be that such a literal translation helped readers learn the Hebrew text through Greek. Ecclesiastes in the LXX also stands out because of its vocabulary. At least 37 words appear nowhere else in the Septuagint, and at least 16 of them is new, non-existent word. When we compare LXX Ecclesiastes with the Masoretic text, we see that the Vorlage, yes, the Hebrew behind the translation, the Hebrew text behind the translation, the Vorlage, is very similar to the medieval Hebrew text we have today. Still, there are some differences, a few extra lines, several variants readings, and some unusual renderings. This indicates that the translator used slightly different Hebrew text from the Masoretic version. Septuagint remains an important witness of textual criticism. In some cases, the Greek wording preserves reading that may be older than the Masoretic version. Some scholars note that the Greek translation gives the book a slightly more pessimistic tone, and that it shows influence from Greek philosophical vocabulary. It is also significant that in the Septuagint tradition, Ecclesiastes was treated as a poetic book, whereas in the Hebrew tradition, the Masoretes classified it as prose. Point 2. Greek translation by Aquila, Symmachus, and Theodotion. Besides the Septuagint, there are three other important Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible in antiquity, those of Aquila, Symmachus, and Theodotion. This version appeared after the LXX and were alternative Jewish translation, sometimes created in opposition to the Christian use of the Septuagint. Aquila of Sinop worked in the early 2nd century AD. His translation is famous to be extremely literal, yes, even more literal than LXX Ecclesiastes. He translated almost word for word and copied Hebrew syntax into Greek. Sometimes this made the text awkward or nearly ungrammatical for the Greek reader. When he had no Greek equivalent, he often chose transliteration or created a new Greek word. He also wrote the divine name, tetragrammaton, in Hebrew letters instead of translating it as Kyrios, Lord, yes, and as Septuagint usually does. His translation had also a polemical aspect. He wanted to provide a Jewish alternative to the Christian reading of LXX. Symmachus. Symmachus worked slightly later, late 2nd or early 3rd century AD. His approach was the opposite of Aquila. Instead of literalism, he aimed to express the meaning of the Hebrew text in smooth, elegant Greek. The result is more natural idiomatic translation. When the Hebrew text was rough or obscure, Symmachus clarified it and made it sound more like Greek prose. This sometimes softens, make more soft the strong or paradoxical tone of Ecclesiastes. An example is how he renders the name Coelet. Instead of translating it as Ecclesiastes, teacher of assembly, he uses paroimiastes. That means the one who speaks wise sayings. Yes, this shows that he reads the book through the lens of wisdom literature and wanted the Greek reader to perceive Kohelet as a teacher of wisdom, not a controversial troublemaker. And Theodotion, late 2nd century AD, represents a middle path between Aquila and Symmachus. He translated it closer to the LXX in tone, but more literal than LXX in structure. Okay, I'm skipping some parts. What is the role of these three in the history of Ecclesiastes text? All three translations were included in Origen's Hexapla because they were important for Jewish and early Christian exegesis. Modern scholars compare them with Septuagint in order to understand how the Greek version developed and how Judaism negotiated its scriptures in context of early Christian movement. These three Jewish translations are therefore crucial for reconstructing the textual history of the book of Ecclesiastes in Greek and for understanding how its interpretation evolved in late antiquity. Point 3. Syriac translation Peshitta. Ancient Syriac Bible called the Peshitta, which means the common or the standard version. It became the official Bible of the Syriac-speaking churches. The First Testament of the Peshitta was probably translated in the 2nd century AD. From which source was Ecclesiastes translated into Syriac? Everything indicates that the Syriac version of Ecclesiastes was translated directly from Hebrew, not from Greek, as earlier studies suggested. Its wording, structure, I have more on this topic here, but I'm skipping. Its wording, structure, and idioms match the Masoretic text very closely, although the Syriac text sometimes looks similar to the Greek wording. However, in few places, the Syriac text follows a Hebrew reading that is not preserved in the Masoretic tradition. This should suggest that the translator may have had access to a slightly different Hebrew Vorlage, possibly Proto-Masoretic form of the text. Hence, Peshitta is also an very important witness to the history of the text of Ecclesiastes and is a valuable reference point for the textual criticism. Point number 4, Old Latin traditions, translations, Vetus Latina. The term Vetus Latina refers to all early Latin translations of the Bible that existed before Vulgate. They were created in different places by different translators, starting probably at the end of 2nd century AD. For the book of Ecclesiastes, however, the situation is difficult because no complete manuscript of the Old Latin version has survived. What we have today come from indirect sources. We have 3 such indirect sources. I am analyzing of all these 3 sources, but here is time limitation, so I will skip also this part of these 3 sources for Vetus Latina. The translation technique of Vetus Latina, I also will skip it, but I will say that about the importance of Vetus Latina. Vetus Latina of Ecclesiastes shows how Christians in the West first understood Ecclesiastes. It provides a comparison point for later revisions, especially Jerome's work. And we are coming to point number five, the Jerome's work, the Vulgate. The most important Latin version of Ecclesiastes is, of course, Vulgate, the translation translated by Saint Jerome. His work on this book is unique because Jerome translated Ecclesiastes several times in different stages of his life, and each stage reflects a slightly different method and purpose. We have as many as 4 stages of Jerome's work on Kohelet. First stage is revision of the Old Latin. At first, Jerome did not create an original translation. He revised existing Vetus Latina, probably comparing it with the hexaploid of origin. This version is now mostly lost. We have second stage of his work, translation for his commentary. When Jerome wrote his commentary on Ecclesiastes in Bethlehem, he included his own fresh translation directly from Hebrew at the beginning of each commented section. This translation is very literal. We have that third stage of his work, free paraphrasing of Kohelet also in his commentary. In the same commentary, Jerome sometimes retranslate the meaning of the verse more freely and loosely to help readers understand the sense. And we have fourth stage of his work, the final Vulgate version. Yes, this version became the part of the Latin Bible. It was written about 10 years after his first work on the book. Here Jerome balances faithfulness to the Hebrew with stylistic clarity and elegance in Latin. The wording is smoother and more natural than in the earlier literal versions. The Vulgate became the standard version of the Ecclesiastes in Western Christianity, replacing all earlier Latin forms. Point number 6, the Ethiopian and Coptic translations. Forgive me, unfortunately, I also will omit the discussion of this translation due to time limitations, but maybe I will say just that the Ethiopian and Coptic translations of Ecclesiastes show the influence of Septuagint far beyond the Mediterranean world. And the Aramaic Targum is not so much a translation, because I also analyze the Aramaic version of Kohelet. Aramaic version is not so much a translation as it is rabbinic commentary inserted into the text itself. So, what we can see from this short summary. The survey of the ancient translations of the Ecclesiastes shows that this book traveled through different linguistic, cultural, and religious settings. The Septuagint gives us very literal translation that reflects late Jewish environment in which Hebrew was treated with special authority. The 3 Jewish revisers, Aquila, Symmachus, Theodotion, represent 3 different strategies of translating scriptures. Aquila, word for word, Symmachus translates the sense, and Theodotion looks for a compromise between both methods. The Old Latin translations confirm that in the Latin West, the earliest version came from the Septuagint, not from the Hebrew. The Vulgate, however, represents a new stage. Jerome turned back to the Hebrew and produced a text that joined fidelity with elegant literary style. And this version became the standard Bible for the more than 1,000 years. Yeah? For believers, for Christians. What that means for the transmission of the biblical text? This study shows several important conclusions for textual history of Kohelet, but not only. First, There were several Vorlage, the Hebrew text before the translator. There were several Vorlage versions of the Book of Kohelet. Masoretic text is a final form of a longer history. Second conclusion, the Septuagint preserves early Hebrew readings, so this translation is also very important. Third, the Peshitta confirms the stabilization of the Hebrew text. By the 2nd century AD, the Proto-Masoretic text was already dominant. Fourth conclusion, the Latin tradition shows a shift from Greek-based translations to Hebrew-based translations. This marks a turning point in Western textual history. And fifth, the Targum provides that the Targum proves that the book was reread, not only retranslated. The Aramaic paraphrases is interpretative, not imitating. In short, the ancient translations are part of the textual transmissions. They don't only reflect interpretation. In several places, they preserve very early stages of the Hebrew tradition of the Hebrew text itself. Thank you very much. 21 minutes.
Thank you very much. This punctuality, discipline. You had to skip some part of your presentation, but we hope that
I think it will be in the written form. Yes,
it will be possible to read everything.
Yes. It is.
Okay, so we have some time. If we have any question, we can make it just now.
I have a question. Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. My question is, because you mentioned that Ecclesiastes represents in different forms the development of the Hebrew text, do you happen to be able to name these stages of Hebrew text of the book of Ecclesiastes?
Thank you, Piotr, for the question. This is difficult. This is very difficult because we can hypothesize some stages, but this is only hypothetical. What can we see from the analyzing of early versions of Kohelet? We can see that the Masoretic text we have, yes, we have Masoretic text from the Leningrad Codex, from the Aleppo Codex, from the Cairo Codex, no, from Aleppo and Leningrad Codex. The text, the Masoretic text we have now, we can see from this we can see that this text was established and was stable very early. I think first or 2nd century AD, the text of Kohelet was very stable at that time. And the version of the Kohelet we have, for example, in Peshitta, or which was translation from Hebrew, we now know it today, and not from Greek. And the version we have in Septuagint can give us, in I think maybe 5, maybe 10 places, a kind of vision of Proto-Masoretic text. Yes. Kind of vision of Proto-Masoretic, and the stages I can point. Yes, the Proto-Masoretic text shown in Septuagint and in Peshitta, and after all, we have something like, I think, stable Masoretic text.
I see. Thank you. And an additional question: did you ever had an idea of comparing the techniques of translation of the book of Job and the book of Ecclesiastes, because both are kind of existential.
Exactly, exactly. The idea is very the idea is excellent. I didn't do it.
Okay,
I didn't do it, but
would be interesting.
when I'm analyzing Kohelet, I see I see many different translation techniques. So I think
Yeah.
the comparison it with Job, yes,
Yes, I mentioned.
I think it would be very
Yeah.
refreshing, very lightening.
Yeah,
I think so.
because both books are somewhat existential, I think,
Exactly,
even
exactly.
for those
Yeah.
times.
And they are coming in competition, and they are coming in conversation with other books and other
Yeah.
parts of Hebrew Hebrew text. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Jakub Loy, next question.
Well, it's not exactly a question, it's just a remark about the comparison of the translation technique of Job and Ecclesiastic into Greek. The Greek translation into Hiob of Job is very, very peculiar, and I don't think it will bear fruits. So in itself, it's interesting, but I don't think it's so very idiosyncratic with Aristotelian marks. So.
Yes. If you say about Septuagint translation of the book of Job, of course, this is a very complicated part of critical textual criticism and other researchers because the text of Job in LXX is quite different from the text that we have today. Yes, so I think with the case of Book of Job, we have quite different Vorlage for the text than we have now today. Yes. For example, we have much more about Job's wife in the Greek version that is completely absent in the Hebrew version. Yes?
Yeah, this is true.
Mhm.
And the translation of Job is not consistent as far as technique is concerned. Some passages are quite close to each other and some are not, and who knows why. Who
Yes.
knows what was there in the mind of the translator
Exactly.
or translators for that matter.
Okay. Thank you. Another question? Maybe one question made by me. We know that you work on a commentary on the book of Kohelet. Am I correct? Yeah.
Yes.
So you have to translate the Hebrew text. So we have a quite good Hebrew version. But when you read all this translation, is there any cases in which the ancient translation helps you to understand better the Hebrew text? Do you have such a cases in
Yes,
book?
of course. Many times, ancient translation help to understand. They understand. They help to understand how they, in their time, they understood the book of Kohelet. Kohelet has some verses that are different, that are hard to understand. So ancient translation, of course, help. I would say that. Ancient translation helped me beside this what I said now. It helped me also in one more way because the text of Kohelet is mix of prose and poetry, and is very mixed text. Like I think Kohelet, he wants to be in the same time Hebrew. He wants to be in the same time he wants to be Greek. Yes, in his teaching. Yes, and the same is about the style. He wants to be in the same time the teacher, and then so the text is a prose, and in the same time he wants to be a poet. So his text is very poetic. And the ancient translation helped me in few cases to decide or to look more carefully what kind of style we have in such in one pericope on war text, yes, one or another text. This, yeah, also in recognizing the style of Kohelet.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for your presentation, for your answers. And now I'd like to welcome our last speaker, Piotr Zaremba, who has already presented himself, making questions. Piotr Zaremba is a lecturer on the Adam Mickiewicz University, Poznań, Poland, biblical scholar, translator of Hebrew and Greek Bible, and also author of the translation of the Old and New Testament, also lecturer at the Baptist Theological Seminary in Warsaw. We are very happy to have you here with us. Your presentation has a very mysterious title, To Hell with Hell. Okay, so
thank you.
The floor is yours.
Yeah, my presentation is entitled To Hell with Hell, Greek and Hebrew hellish terminology and reflections on its translation. As an introduction, the Bible identifies various places where those who have completed their earthly existence move to dwell. Among these, hell, it is fire pit, appears to be the most intriguing. This is because behind the name of this place, hell, it is fire pit, there are several different Hebrew and Greek terms. Hell, therefore, can be regarded, at least to some extent, as a construct of translators. The construct, in this case, unjustified by the principles of translation. The topic is particularly significant because hell evokes strong emotions. It raises questions about the rightness of divine justice and places a question mark over the very nature of God's love. Moreover, with the ongoing process of secularization, hell as a place of eternal punishment has ceased to frighten people, if that was ever its intended purpose, and has in some measure become a burden to Christianity. What should be done with hell? It is fire pit. Perhaps, once again, the translators of the future Bible translations could help to find a way forward. And the important thing, it should be stressed that the Polish word piekło, if translated back to English, would not correspond to hell, but rather to fire pit. This is why in my paper that I'm going to present to you later, hell is addressed with an expression, hell, it is fire pit, because this is not the same. I start with etymology of hell, it is fire pit. Let me now continue with fire pit. Polish noun piekło, which is fire pit, is derived from the Old Polish pkieł, attested as early as 13th century, meaning tar. The origin of pkieł itself is traced to Greek pisa, Attic pita, and Latin pix, both meaning tar or pitch. The noun piekło is also linked to Old Czech, and Old Russian peklo, meaning heat, blaze, burning. In the Old Czech milieu, peklo, Polish piekło, made its dwelling place in the religious vocabulary of Christianity. From the 15th century onward, in that linguistic and cultural area, peklo denoted the abode of evil spirits and souls of the condemned people subject to torment in heated tar. Thus, hell, or fire pit, rightly evokes associations with posthumous suffering, tar, the heat of flames, and those who ended their earthly life in morally reprehensible condition according to the religious judgment. Now, interesting, it should be noted that hell, it is fire pit, in this sense, is not a legacy of pre-Christian Slavic religions. Logically, one might suppose, therefore, that the fire pit ought to have its origin in writings regarded as authoritative within the Christianity in which the term took root. So, where in those writings we can find mention of hell, which is fire pit, in the sense implied by the etymology to Polish noun piekło. Now, fire pit in the Hebrew Bible. Let's look at this. There are 7 nouns in the Hebrew Bible that describe the places where those who have completed their earthly existence moved to dwell. There's also additional expression associated with the noun afar, meaning dust. These nouns, first, listed in order of frequency are as follows: Mavet, Afar, Bor, Kever, Sheol, Shahat, and Abaddon. The expression related to Afar, that is dust, appears in Ecclesiastes 12:7, and the dust returns to earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. From that sentence, we can derive the place with God, Hammakom im Elohim. Now, conclusions from that. The meaning of these 7 words and the context in which they appear lead to 3 key conclusions. All of the 7 words listed are semantically related to Sheol, which functions as an abstract generalization of these more concrete designations. According to the Hebrew Bible, the places of the dead are essentially 2: Sheol for the material body, and Hamakom im Elohim for the spirit given by God. This conviction remained part of Israel's linguistic culture at the time of the composition of Ecclesiastes. None of the words listed above correspond in meaning to the Polish word piekło. Therefore, none can be translated as such without violating the principle of equivalence. That is, that a word in a source language should be rendered by a word in the target language that most closely corresponds to its semantic domain. Now let's go to the Septuagint. In the Septuagint, there are both books of the Hebrew Bible translated into Greek and 16 additional books or shorter literary units not found in the Hebrew Bible. Now, Hebrew words and their equivalents in the Septuagint look like in that table. Oh, sorry. And basically, they are translated the way you can see here. And Septuagint also have two more notions, noun tartaros and verb tartaro. The noun tartaros appears in 4th Maccabees 8:5 in the phrase Tartar and Hades are prepared for the tyrant. And the verb tartaro occurs in Proverbs 17:11 in the phrase a disobedient man falls into calamities, and a merciless angel will cast him into Tartar. Both notions do not have a source word in Hebrew Bible. And also the position of these two notions is not very strong because of the status of the books that you see here in, you see references in the Septuagint. So because of this, I would say that basically conclusions one can draw from the Septuagint are similar to the conclusions that I read that are drawn from the Hebrew Bible, which means there is nothing in the Septuagint that would justify the translation of these words or rendering these words with Polish piekło. Now let's go to the extra-biblical tradition of the Second Temple Judaism. In this presentation, the extra-biblical tradition of the Second Temple Judaism refers primarily to Jewish thought that began to develop after the reform of Ezra in the mid-5th century BCE as an oral Torah, and was later preserved in writing in rabbinic literature of the 2nd century of Christian era. That is, in the Mishnah and in later works. But within the same tradition, it is reasonable to include other textual witnesses composed before Christ or written later, but preserving the thought of the 1st century of Christian era, which the writings of the New Testament were in a process, when the writings of the New Testament were in process of formation. The earliest of these witnesses is pseudo-epigraphical apocalyptic book, the first book of Enoch, dated variously, depending on its section, between the 3rd and the 1st century before Christ. Now, in short, the first book of Enoch introduced fire in connection with judgment. Pirkei Avot introduced Gehenna as a place of punishment in its 2 passages. Both fire and Gehenna got combined in the Jewish thought in Maccabean times or earlier. This is because, although Pirkei Avot is from the 2nd century AD, Christian era, it preserves the saying of Yosef ben Yohanan, Av Bet Din during Antioch Epiphanes IV. This is why this point 3rd. However, fire of Gehenna was not only destructive, but also refining. This is from Tosefta. Tosefta is even younger, but it builds on Mishnah and builds on earlier traditions. This is why I dared to mention it. And even I think, and I can kind of prove it, that in the writings of the Apostle Paul, there is the same idea that we find in Pirkei Avot. Gehenna was not eternal, but also temporary. Now, let's go to the New Testament. And again, in short, the places of abode for those who have completed their earthly existence are described in the writings of the New Testament with the same terms as in the Hebrew Bible and the Septuagint. In addition, though, to the terms found in the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament introduces two further expressions originating outside of the Hebrew Bible. The verb tartaro, known from the Septuagint, and the noun Gehenna, and the fire of Gehenna, Gehenna Pyros, from the extra-biblical traditions from which the word Gehenna derives. Now, can any word describing the abode of the deceased in the New Testament be translated with piekwo without violating the principles of translation? As shown, it cannot be done for the words already examined in the Hebrew Bible and the Septuagint. But can it be done with a noun Gehinnom, translated into Greek as Gehenna? That is, can Gehenna rightly be rendered fire pit or piekwo? This too cannot be done without violating the rules of translation. And here are my points. The noun Gehinnom is later term, originating in extra-biblical traditions of the Second Temple Judaism, not in the Hebrew Bible, where it functions only as toponym. For that matter, it is never translated with the word Gehenna in the Septuagint. As a term from extra-biblical Second Temple Judaism, Gehinnom denotes both eternal punishment, though not necessarily absolutely endless, and temporary punishment. The fire of Gehenna is not only destructive, but also purifying. My third point: within the Second Temple Jewish tradition, Gehinnom appears as a variable concept, not uniformly understood by the leading rabbinic schools in the turn of the era. And it crystallized theologically only in later centuries. The noun Gehinnom is a conceptual, not physical term. It denotes not a real, mappable location within the dimensions of the universe, but rather a logical category structuring the moral sphere, used to assign a place to those in rebellion against God. Sorry, I need to go back. Now, Jesus Christ is not the revealer of the nature of Gehinnom. In his teaching, he refers instead to the notions already in use and still being developed within Second Temple Judaism, at least since the Maccabean period. And my sixth point, even when Jesus Christ refers to Gehinnom as a place of eternal punishment, he does so in the context of his proclamation of the good news as a sole means of reconciliation with God, not as one of several alternative possibilities he offers. 7, translating the noun Gehinnom with Greek Gehenna as a fire pit or piekwo introduces, especially for confessional traditions that recognize as canonical only the writings of Hebrew Bible, the Septuagint, and the New Testament taken together or grouped in any form, introduces a concept that cannot be explained within their own linguistic framework. Hence, in explanations, Gehenna is often connected with the Valley of Hinnom, which is unjustified. And 8th point, translating Gehinnom with Greek Gehenna as piekło or fire pit in the later medieval meaning of that term is simply a historical anachronism. So, how to translate the noun Gehinnom, Greek Gehenna? The answer depends on the translation technique employed. In so-called literal translations, where there is also space for commentary or explanatory notes, it is appropriate to render the term as Gehenna or Gehenna. We would say Gehenna. The word Gehenna already exists in Polish as a loanword and is used as a common noun. Such translations create room for expressions like the Gehenna to Pyros or a Gehenna topir to asbeston that appear in Jewish and early Christian pseudepigrapha, thereby contributing to the better understanding of the cultural context of the period. In a literary, dynamic, idiomatic, or exegetical translation, depending on their intended purpose, one might translate Gehenna as place of punishment. Depending on the scope of material taken as a context, other renderings may include place of punishment, place of judgment, place of destruction, place of inner pain and suffering, or place of irretrievable loss. And what should be done to the word piekło, fire pit? I think that in the field of biblical translation, it should be abandoned. Or, poetically, as my title says, maybe we should send hell to hell. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. It could be even more interesting in Polish because we understand all these small nuances of this word piekło. Okay,
Right.
we open the discussion. If somebody would like to say something or make a question. Okay, Marcin Majewski.
Moment. Okay, yes. You can see me and hear me, yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Piotr, for your presentation. Very interesting. You mentioned about Kohelet, so I would like to ask a question. I would like to ask a question. How do you understand this phrase from Kohelet, from Ecclesiastes, from 12:7?
Yeah.
About this afar and ruach? What do you mean about? You said that there are two places, Sheol and a place with God. I think we should understand this ruach. Maybe first I said how I understand it as not this. It doesn't mean a personal individual soul. But like in later theological sense, but rather something like, I don't know, life breath that comes from God, yes, or principle of life. This is for sure. This verse draw anthropology from the Genesis 2:7, yes, that humanity is created
Right.
from dust, and we have this God. Inspiration, God imparts breath, yeah. So how do you understand this?
Well, actually, this subject of piekło and the fact that piekło was made as a place by translators to be the place of eternal punishment. And now when I can see that this is just an empty notion, biblically speaking, then I started to think, what really happens when we end our earthly existence? And yeah, this Ecclesiastes 12:7 says things that, to be honest, I am in a process of meditating on, because if Jesus Christ was using these notions that were circulating in his times, then I wonder what he would tell me if I asked him, well, I'm not Jewish. Now tell me, what happens when we end this life? What would he tell me? Would he refer to the same vocabulary and notions that were present in the Jewish society of his times, or would he tell me something else, something similar to Paul when he spoke at the Areopagus? And well, I'm still thinking, and believe me, and if I will have any conclusive idea, I will write you.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know.
I think this is part of I would say a Christian reading of this verse. So in this from this point of view,
Yeah.
yes. But if we trying to hear Kohelet, I think he saw the life of a human here on the earth only. Yes, and and this is a part of his dramatizing and controversial thesis
Right.
in his book, the notion of end of human life, and
Yeah.
in this 12:7, I think he gathered this idea from Genesis, yeah, where we have a human, we have a dust, we have afar, and we have a breath of God, nishmat chaim, or
Yeah.
ruach from God. But okay, in next stages of interpretation, maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another question?
Yeah. Now let me also mention that some of the parts I went through very fast, desiring to leave us some time for questions, quite detailedly discussed in my paper.
Some remarks, other observations, some questions? If not, at this point, we can end our session.
Thank you.
90 minutes of work. Thank you for all your presentations. Thank you also for the participation at this meeting. And I would like to remind you only that the next session, the fourth session, will start at 5 p.m. So we have still half an hour to rest a little. So at this point, thank you very much, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.